live on MaxDefender8.com, powered by Bernetti PA. Here's Chief Meteorologist Jeff Berardelli.
All right, good Monday evening, everybody, and thanks for tuning in. We have a pretty big threat for severe weather during the day tomorrow. I think it's a widespread threat. I do think we'll likely see tornado warnings. We probably will see a couple of tornadoes. I don't think this is going to be a devastating severe weather outbreak because there's a somewhat limiting factor in that it's not hot, right? You walked outside today, it was kind of cool. We didn't have that much moisture out there. So that's the one thing that's going to be lacking. Everything else in the atmosphere is lining up for a big severe weather outbreak. So I do think it'll be significant. I do think it'll be widespread. And I think there is the possibility or maybe even likelihood of a couple of tornadoes around here. So this is a very significant severe weather outbreak, but I just will say that, this is not looking like the most catastrophic or major outbreak we've seen here in the Bay Area, but it is a pretty big one. So let's talk about what we're expecting here. So first, I want to call your attention to this map right here. You can see how that storm is really winding up across the Plain States. This is a really big storm. Even when we say, this is a big storm, we always say, a big storm is moving across the U.S. This is actually a really large storm in girth. And you can see that squall line that's now developing to the south of Louisiana and off the Texas coast. That's the squall line that's going to be headed our way. So first, I want to give you kind of a lowdown of what's going to be happening. I am going to be answering questions on Facebook. I have Facebook open right now on the Facebook main page. So on the WFLA page, you might be seeing this on any of the weather team's Facebook pages, but the one that I'll be answering questions on is the main Facebook page. All right. So first of all, we're going to see a line of storms that's going to move in. There are going to be very few showers ahead of the line. It's just really going to be a solid line of storms. It's going to move in anywhere between early afternoon to early evening, depending upon where you are, assuming you're located in the Tampa Bay area. We're going to see blinding rain because it's going to come in really fast, and the winds are going to be whipping as it comes through. We're going to see probably just generally 50-mile-an-hour wind gusts for almost everybody as the line comes through. And then, obviously, in some of those stronger thunderstorm cells and the potential tornadoes, the gusts will be a lot higher than that. So a burst of wind is the biggest threat. Also, lots of lightning as the line comes through. And there could very well be a few tornadoes. Also, this is obvious, I think, but really dangerous marine conditions. Gale warning is in effect. And because the waves are going to be about 10 feet in the Gulf of Mexico, and we're going to see that strong onshore flow, we're going to see about 2 to 4 feet of storm surge. Now, that's a worst-case scenario. And one thing that's going to mitigate that and help us out a little bit is the fact that we're going to probably see the line come through during low tide for most locations. That's going to help. All right, I want to show you what time the storms are going to be rolling in. Looks like probably as early as 2 p.m. in places like Crystal River. And that line will quickly move east. And honestly, by 3:34, it should already be located in Tampa. That's how quickly it's going to be moving. I'd say the worst of it in Lakeland is anywhere between 3 and 5 p.m. Same thing in places like Bradenton and Sarasota. And then in southern and eastern parts of the viewing area, so anywhere from, let's say, Frostproof, Lake Wales, southward to Wauchula, Sebring, and Arcadia, and probably Northport as well, 5 to 7 p.m. will be the worst for you, although it could get there a little earlier in Northport. All right, so let's show you what the radar should look like tomorrow. And look at how solid that line of storms is. Now, I'll tell you, normally when you see a linear, kind of a straight line of storms move through, you don't often get tornadoes around here. But there's something very special about this system in that the computer models, and just about every one I've seen, indicates a really large amount of spin inside this line. So we have these discrete supercells embedded in this line. And although the line is straight, there's rotating cells. And I can't say that I've seen many instances where a line of storms had as much spin, or what we call in meteorology helicity, as this one is forecast to have. So at 2 p.m. moving into the Nature Coast, 3 p.m. it's moving through Newport Richey, moving through Clearwater, it's knocking on the door at Tampa. Worst of it over Tampa is somewhere between 3:30 and 4 o'clock. Now again, this could be off by an hour either way. It's not going to be exact. But this is at least what one of our better computer models says. Notice at 4 p.m., it's moving through Bradenton, knocking on the door of Sarasota. Lakeland from 4:30 to 5:30, you're under the gun with heavy rain, gusty winds. And notice the line doesn't really weaken much as it heads east. It stays strong all the way through our southern counties. 6 p.m., it's headed into Highlands County. It's already kind of moved through or moving through Hardee and DeSoto County. And then by 7:30, 8 o'clock, it's on its way out of our viewing area. But everybody is going to see the potential for severe weather. This is truly going to be a widespread outbreak around here. All right, so here are the ingredients you need for severe weather, and we'll talk about each one individually. First of all, we have enough moisture, no doubt. I wouldn't say that the moisture is off the charts. It's not. I mean, typically during the fall and during, really warm parts of the winter, when it really warms up, we would have more moisture in the atmosphere. But the cooler the temperatures are, the less moisture there is. So overall, the moisture is probably slightly more than moderate. Okay, but that's plenty. You don't need much more for tornadoes. The part that's missing is the heat energy. That is kind of on the lower side of moderate. It's definitely not a low amount of heat energy. It's more than we had last week, but it's still not particularly high. And that's the limiting factor. It's going to help us from having just an absolute gargantuan severe weather outbreak. We should be limited by that heat energy. However, the reason why this is looking like we can overcome this heat energy deficiency is because we have such a strong low-level jet. 80 miles an hour plus right above our heads, in the low levels of what we would call, the jet stream level. So low-level jet. And then wind shear is actually very high. Indicating that there's a lot of spin, even though this is an actual just line of thunderstorms. So the biggest threat is going to be bursts of wind across the Bay Area. So the highest threat is wind. We talked about that. We have a moderate threat for tornadoes, and not just EF0, not just 60 or 70 mile an hour winds, but the potential for some tornadoes that have winds over 100 miles an hour. Certainly possible. I think we have a low threat for hail, a low threat for any flooding rain, because everything's moving pretty quickly through the area. But as far as flooding goes, it'll be coastal flooding, and that risk is somewhere between low and moderate. So 2 to 4 feet of storm surge would be similar to what we saw just a few weeks ago. So there's the significant tornado parameter, and it went through so quickly. I want to go backwards and show it to you hour by hour. So first of all, I can tell you that first of all, I worked in the Tampa Bay area back in the late 90s, so I'm very familiar with the weather here, and I worked here through about 2003. But ever since then, I've worked in different parts of Florida. Generally, and at least for the majority of the time. The reason why I bring that up is because I've seen a lot of severe weather setups all across the state, and it is very rare to see a significant tornado parameter this high. I mean, you can see that at 3 p.m. tomorrow as the line's moving through coastal areas, we're looking at a 3 to 4 on our scale. Now, this scale would not be as high, let's say, in Oklahoma or Texas, where they regularly see big tornadoes, but for us, on a scale from 1 to 5, this is the kind of day where the risk for a tornado is probably somewhere between a 3 and a 4. And you can see as it moves through, it maintains those really sharp, those bright colors that are, at least a 3. And in some cases, if you see Palmetto and Sarasota right there, up to about a 4. And again, you can look at the timing on the top of the graphic. You can see it's 3 o'clock at the coast, 4 o'clock Tampa, Palmetto, Sarasota, 5 o'clock, Lakeland, Winter Haven, Bartow, all the way down to Sarasota, and then so on and so forth. It moves through the area. So this is about the highest that I've seen the significant tornado parameter for such a wide area. Now, I've seen small individual thunderstorms that have had significant tornado parameters that strong, but I've never seen it for such a wide area. You can see it basically covers the whole area because, the whole line moves through, and the whole line has between a 3 and a 4. So this is a fairly significant risk for, tornadoes that are not just weak tornadoes, but tornadoes that can have winds of 100 plus miles an hour. Then the last thing I want to bring up, and then I'm going to answer some questions, is that there is going to be coastal flooding. Now, low tide is happening in the middle to late part of the afternoon, exactly when this front comes in. That's great. That'll shave maybe a foot off of the flooding that would have otherwise occurred. The high tide, the low tide during the middle of the day is not very low. Tomorrow's a weird tide day. Some of our locations only have 2 tides rather than 4. That happens every once in a while. So I don't want to get too in the weeds with tides because it's going to really just depend upon where you live. I do think we're going to be lucky in that we'll probably lose a foot of tidal flooding. If it had come on during high tide, it would be probably at least a foot worse. But still, I think it's conceivable in a worst case scenario, we could see 2 to 4 feet of coastal flooding just above ground level. So these are the kind of coastal flooding that you may expect to see, that we saw 3-4 weeks ago, across a lot of our area. So Just be aware that if you flooded last time, you could very well flood again. All right, I'm going to start answering some questions on Facebook for you. Saw someone come into the Weather Center a second ago. I just wanted to see if it was important. All right. Yeah, Pinellas County is not closed tomorrow. Yes, there are. It's interesting because some of the schools are closed across the area. Some are half days. Some are closing early. So these are really good questions. And I see a lot of questions about schools, and I'll be honest with you, I haven't been following that closely, but what I can tell you is that you can go to WFLA.com and you can just load up the homepage, and it's our #1 story right now as to what is happening tomorrow, what's closed, what's not closed. Okay, so definitely check that out. Joe says it's just going to be rain. And for most people, yeah, that's right. It will just be rain and really gusty winds. But for some unlucky folks, you will probably be under tornado warnings, and likely there will be at least a few tornadoes. So that really just depends. Joe wants to know, what are the chances for a tornado in Spring Hill? I think the chances for a tornado in places like Spring Hill may be slightly higher than, let's say, further south in, Northport or Sarasota. But it's really not much of a difference. So let me show you again. The line is a little stronger on its northern end, but even on its southern end, you can see that the significant tornado parameter is just as high. So there's really not much of a difference. I think the chance is that most of us will be under a tornado warning for some time tomorrow. So, maybe half of the area, maybe the majority of the area. Whether or not that will actually result in a tornado, that is something that just can't be forecast. But I think conditions are ripe such that the National Weather Service will likely issue some tornado warnings during the day tomorrow. Someone's asking about Wildwood. I assume you mean Wildwood, New Jersey. And I really have to be honest, I don't know for sure when it's going to hit. But I can tell you that I've been following closely enough to know that there's a wicked jet stream aloft. That's not just across Florida, but it gets even stronger once you go up the eastern seaboard towards Wildwood. So thank you for your question. Cheryl says Polk County schools are not closed as of this point. Newport Richey after 3 to San Antonio will be high wind during driving. Yeah, so that's a good question. Let's go back and I'll show you the timing of the rain. And so the heaviest rain moves into Newport Richey about 2:30. And it is located in eastern Polk County by about 4:30. So it's about a 2-hour window. The strongest winds will be moving across Newport Richey 2:30, and then, Zephyr Hills by like 4:30. Thanks for that question. Yeah, Jamie, that's a good question. She wants to know when the surge can be expected. And there could be two of them. One during the actual front that passes, or this squall line. That'll happen in the middle of the afternoon. So you can see the timing of it for yourself right here. Comes in anywhere between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock, just depending upon where on the coast you are. But then there's a high tide during the evening, 9, 10 o'clock at night. Again, depends upon where you live. Could see another, influx of water. And I would just say that if you typically flood and you live along the coast, that you should be prepared for potential flooding. Because it looks similar to what, we were looking at just a few weeks ago in December. All right, Scott wants to know about the villages. So the villages are likely to see the worst of the weather move in. Looks like around 3 p.m., give or take, okay? 3 p.m. could be a half hour earlier, could be a half hour later, but the worst of it's around 3 p.m. Thanks for the question. Kathy wants to know about Indian Shores, and, oftentimes places like Indian Shores take the brunt of this because you're right along the coast, and also you're very low lying. So the places that normally flood in Indian Shores, I would plan for that. And we cannot rule out the chance of a tornado. Typically what happens is you get a line of storms, and embedded in that line, you have a few cells, maybe 3 or 4 cells that are rotating. And at any time, those storms can produce tornadoes. So we should be on the lookout for that. And remember, it's going to move through quick. I mean, look how narrow that line is. So let's take one, city, for instance. Let's take Homosassa. Here we are at 2 o'clock. The rain's moving in, maybe a little earlier than that. So 1:45, it's about to rain in Homosassa. Let's see how long the heavy rain is in Homosassa. So by 2:45, the heavy rain is done in Homosassa. The reds have already moved south of you. And by 3:45, the rain is almost done in Homosassa. So 2 hours of rain and about an hour of really heavy rain, just to give you an idea. Rebecca wants to know about Bradenton. So here we are at 4 p.m., and it looks like the heaviest rain moves in around 4 p.m. And look at how solid that line of storms is. You can see the purples, actually, if you look closely enough. That's a place that's going to have a little more heat energy. It's a place that's going to have every bit of strong winds aloft. So, although the winds are a little stronger on the Nature Coast, the instability is a little stronger down south, and they'll probably end up equalizing out, and everyone stands a pretty good chance of seeing tornado warnings and the possibility of tornadoes. Mary wants to know about Lake Wales. So Lake Wales is located to the southeast of Lakeland, and you can see that the heaviest storms in Lake Wales come in at around 5 o'clock. They enter Lake Wales at around 5 p.m. And they are on the way out by 6. So just an hour, maybe less, of heavy rain. That's it. That's a saving grace. We're not going to see much flooding because it's going to be moving so fast. But you know what's interesting? So far, most of our reporting sites have picked up around twice the normal rain for winter. Remember, we had that huge deficit across coastal areas during the summertime. Some places 1 to 2 feet. Tampa, St. Pete, about a little over a foot deficit. Sarasota was close to 2 feet of a deficit. But now we're catching up a little, at least. We've seen about double the amount of normal rainfall so far this winter, and it's going to continue. It's going to rain again this Thursday and Friday. Not much, but it will rain. And then early next week, next Monday, Tuesday, we could see another significant rainfall event. So thank you. Carissa wants to know about Sarasota and what time the rain's going to move into there. So let's time it for you. There it is right there, moving in at around 4:15. And lasting probably through around 5:30 and then kind of slowing down after that. Okay. You're welcome, Mary. My pleasure. Let's see. What other questions do we have here? Jackie wants to know about Lake County. Lake County, of course, you're east of our Nature Coast areas. And Lake County looks like the worst of it's going to move into you 3:30, give or take. And it'll last through, the worst of it at least, last through like 4:45, 5 o'clock. And then after that, the heaviest stuff will start to wind down. But the rain will last a good hour after the heavy stuff moves through. Casey wants to know if we think it'll hit 80 degrees. I'm not sure, Casey, where you live. Betty wants to know about Newport Richey. I'm sorry if I'm not answering your questions, but there's so many questions coming in right now that they're moving so fast. It's impossible to, the moment I see your question, your name is pretty much gone. But I see Mavis wants to know about Safety Harbor. So let's time it out for you in Safety Harbor. And one of the things about living in a place like Safety Harbor is you're right near the bay. Sometimes we can get these, see that one cell that develops ahead of the line right there? It really comes up through St. Pete and then moves up through Tampa. We can get these discrete cells that are kind of separate from the line that move through. And sometimes it'll happen. It'll develop off the bay or eastern Pinellas and move north and kind of scrape by Oldsmar and Safety Harbor. So, you can sometimes get elevated risk for tornadoes there. But anyway, the timing on Safety Harbor seems to be right around coming in at around 3 p.m. And the worst of the weather is exiting Safety Harbor by around 4:15, 4 o'clock. So it's about an hour of solid storms. Rachel wants to know about Clearwater. You're obviously going to get it a bit earlier in Clearwater. So let's show you. Here we are at 3. So the worst of it's already moving in at 3. So it comes in a little earlier there. And the worst of it's done by like 3:45. So, again, the timing on this is not exact. Going back to... I want to show you something else. I'm going to pull another graphic in here and show you why we're concerned about this system. First of all, it's an El Nino. And if you've been watching me, you know that I've been talking about El Nino for months and months and months since the summertime. And this is a strong El Nino. And we're seeing very, characteristic features of the El Nino, which is, at least a couple of storms a week with a severe weather threat once 1 or 2 weeks. And we've been seeing that. So notice how bright those colors. This is a low-level jet stream you're looking at. And you can see that low-level jet overhead. And here we are at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. As the storms are rolling through, the winds aloft are about 80 miles an hour. So if the storms are strong enough in that line, they can pull that wind down to the surface. So that's one of the things we look for is, do we have a strong low-level jet? And yeah, for our area, this is actually very strong. Matthew wants to know about a high surf warning. So we have, and I don't know exactly where Matthew lives, but we do have some problems here in the Bay Area, coastal problems. Coastal flood warning is in effect. Obviously, a rip current advisory, a gale warning is in effect. So just about every marine issue that you could deal with, we have tomorrow. So Natalie wants to know about Lakeland and Winter Haven. So let's go back and show you this significant tornado parameter, because this also coincides with the line of storms moving through. And you can see the worst of it is anywhere between 4 o'clock in Winter Haven and Lakeland and about 5:30. And then the worst threat, the severe threat, moves on to the east. Michelle is asking about St. Pete Beach. Again, anybody along the beach oftentimes stands a slightly better chance of getting tornadoes because it's easier for these storms to produce tornadoes over the water. There's no friction over the water. There's no buildings. There's nothing to kind of mess up the circulation, so it's easy for them to get going. So to give you an idea, in St. Pete Beach, when the line of storms is going to be moving in, well, it's going to be around 3 p.m., as early as 3 p.m. I'll show you. Here we are at 3, and you can see those storms are about to move into St. Pete Beach. So the worst of it's between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock, and then it's gone. So again, you know, it could vary. It could be a little earlier, it could be a little later, but that's the general idea. And yeah, I think coastal locations stand a slightly better chance of seeing a tornado risk there. So Diane wants to know about Orlando, because she's going to be landing there. So let me fast forward this to Orlando. So the worst of it in Orlando is like 5 p.m. And then it looks like by 7 p.m. things are clearing in Orlando. If not clearing, it's not nearly as bad. So I think your flight, when it's supposed to land, will be, you know, decent. But the problem is are they going to have a ground stop for an hour or so, which I think they may. So there may be a delay just based upon what's happening before you're supposed to arrive at the airport. So thanks for that. You know, Michael, I'm not an expert on Shreveport. I see the question. Yeah, that's just a little bit out of my wheelhouse. Not to say that I couldn't examine it for Shreveport, but it looks like the worst of the weather is going to be closer to the Gulf Coast, so closer to the actual Gulf. I think Shreveport has the threat, but I can't be 100% sure. What I do know is, you know, places like Mobile, Panama City, Pensacola, that area of the coast, they're going to stand a very high chance of some tornadoes during the day tomorrow. Yeah, so Citrus County. Teresa wants to know about Citrus County. So here we are. You're going to get the storms first, and it looks like they begin to roll in between 1:45 and 2. And then the worst of the weather has already moved out of Homosassa by 3. So, and into eastern Citrus County. So it's about an hour, and the worst of it comes around 2. But again, it could vary a little bit. Yep, Nikki, you should be watching from Pensacola because I think you stand a better chance of tornadoes than we do. So just be on the lookout. Casey wants to know about Valrico. So it's going to be a little later for you. Valrico, the worst starts to move in at around 4 p.m. and probably lasts through about 5 p.m. And then it starts to weaken after that. So it's only about an hour, but it comes in really fast and sideways, the rain, and just limited visibility. You know, it's going to come in like a freight train, I think. All right. Mayan wants to know about Palm Harbor. So for Palm Harbor, that heavy rain moves in around 3, give or take. Could be a little before that. And, you know, and the most torrential of downpours is done by around 4 p.m., maybe a little before. And then, you know, it just slowly winds down so that all the rain, for the most part, should be done by around 6 p.m., give or take, in Palm Harbor. Nina asks about St. Pete. So in downtown St. Pete, the heaviest rain moves in around 3:30. And then that torrential rain is done by 4 p.m., so only a half hour, maybe a little bit longer than that. But the moderate rain sticks around in St. Pete probably until about 5:30. Okay. Let's see. Thank you, Seema. Answered your question about St. Petersburg. Danielle wants to know about Sarasota County and Northport. So it's going to be obviously a little later in Sarasota County, but moving into Northport at around 5 p.m. And the worst of it lasting in Northport until about 6 p.m. So between 5 and 6 is the worst. Yini wants to know about Tampa and Brandon. So it looks like Tampa, you start getting the worst of it. I would say it's going to end up being around 3:15, 3:30. And it's bad until about 4:15, 4:30. So for about an hour, and by 5 p.m., it's just rain, and the heaviest stuff has moved east towards Lakeland and into Polk County. So, yep, Melissa, I hope you heard what I just said. The worst of it's going to be moving to Polk County at around 4:30, probably lasting until around 6, depending upon where in Polk County you are. It's a big county, obviously. All right. I see Teresa from Zephyr Hills. Now, if I'm not answering your question, sometimes it's just that it's out of my viewing area, and I'm just don't know enough about your viewing area to answer your question. So if you're asking from like a different part of the U.S., it just may be too hard for me to know. It's limited to what I have in front of me here, right here. But now I forget the person's question that I was going to answer. But I do see a question about Port Richey, and that's a good question because I think it's going to come in pretty hard in Port Richey. So it looks like 2:30 in Port Richey is when it first gets in, and the worst of the heavy rain is done by 3:30 in New Port Richey. Michelle wants to know about Miami. It's a little bit too far south for me to tell you, but there is a threat for severe weather. Palm Coast, this line's going to weaken a little bit when it gets to the east, but you can see that it gets to Palm Coast probably around 7:30, 8 o'clock. Maybe as early as 7 p.m. in Palm Coast. And it's still a pretty solid line of storms there, so you could see just as much severe weather as we see in the Bay Area. Frostproof winds. I think you're going to see some gusts to 45 in frostproof, but again, there's going to be some embedded cells that are stronger in this line. And so any of those cells could easily produce winds over 60. So 45 in general. Everyone that's watching here in the Tampa Bay area at least, is going to have some winds to 40, 50 miles an hour. That's pretty much, I think, almost a guarantee. Somewhere in that range, at least for a brief moment or two. But some of the unlucky folks will be under those supercell storms. And in that case, you'll have gusts to 60, 70, and then some tornadic winds possibly in some areas too. Yeah, so Waleska wants to know how strong the winds in Tampa are going to be. I think I just answered that. It's pretty much the same for everyone in the area. All right, I'm going to take this question from Bradenton, Florida, and then I'll answer Port Charlotte after that. So in Bradenton, let's go backwards a little bit. Looks like the heaviest storms will roll in at around 4 p.m. and last through around, 4:30, 5 o'clock. And then as far as Port Charlotte goes, the worst for the weather for you will likely start moving in at around 5:30. And that is going to last until about 6:30. So not going to last very long, but it's certainly conceivable. All right, one more question, then I got to go. Just looking for a different city. So Savetta wants to know about Gainesville. So Gainesville is kind of out of this picture here, but I can tell you based upon, so Gainesville would be right about there. So I would say I prepare for the storms to get into Gainesville as early as around 1:30. And then the worst of it would be between 1:30 and around 2:30. And then the storm should move on after that. All right, everybody, I just want to thank you for tuning in. Listen, tomorrow we're going to start our live stream at 1 p.m. And we're going to be streaming live the whole event until it's gone. So figure maybe until 7 p.m. or so. But we're going to start early. So make sure you check our WFLA Facebook page. You can check any of our Facebook pages, any of the weather team's Facebook pages as well. And you can also get our app. Just make sure you download our app. Our app is free. You can get lightning alerts when lightning's within a few miles of your location. That's helpful. Also, I send out alerts to people, letting them know when we're live, when we're about to live stream. So hopefully, it'll let you know, hey, they've just come up on a live stream. Or if there's a tornado warning, it'll also let you know if there's a tornado warning, and you'll be able to watch our coverage live. Okay, everyone? Thanks so much, and I will see you tomorrow afternoon at around 1 p.m. Stay safe, everybody.